everybody. Welcome. Thanks for coming along. My name, can everyone hear me? I'm a bit lower. I'm a bit shorter. My name's Dunn. I'm a video designer. Not wanting to sound like Alcoholics Anonymous, but that is what I do. I also teach the discipline at RADA. I've recently taken up the post as Joint Head of Video and Digital Design, which I share with Timothy Bird. My background is a content designer. I come from the world of broadcast, and I find that it's very interesting entering into theatre. A couple of years ago I won a Night of Illumination award, and at the time I joked about the fact that when I grew up I was going to be a lighting designer. Now, many a true word spoken in jest. What I want to talk about here is a certain convergence that's happening between the disciplines of lighting and video, and want to show you some really dynamic ways of using video as light within shows, both from the theatre end of the scale to the concert and live end of the scale. As it happens, half of my work at least goes completely unnoticed as video anyway. I do a lot of video by stealth, partly because I think that you have to look at the show as a whole, and you have to join forces and collaborate. There's been the word collaboration a lot talked about over the last few days, and also in this space in the previous session, and I think collaborative work between anyone who's dealing within theatre is crucial. Let's have a look at this one. But I'm really, really happy to be able to introduce the panel that I've got here. Talked about who I am. We've also got Joshua Pharo. He's a lighting designer and a video designer. He comes from a background of fringe to mid-scale type shows, and he has recently been nominated for a Night of Illumination award for Removal Men, which is a show that's predominantly lit with projectors. So I think it's also really important to have him on the panel, because a lot of people assume that you need a lot of money and a lot of time to work with video, and actually it can be a very efficient tool when used wisely. Sarah Cox at the end there, Sales Director at EMEA of D3 Technologies, fantastic platform for both lighting and video designers to work with. Shannon Harvey is the visual production course leader at Backstage Academy, an extremely forward-thinking academy of people who are going to take over the world. Rick Fisher needs no introduction really. Recently won the Night of Illumination Award for a lifetime recognition, the Enrico Caironi Award, and has been involved with the Night of Illuminations for a long time. There's a bit of a theme running here. He's a lighting designer, but works very collaboratively with video. And Pablo Beckett, who has just won a Night of Illumination Award for his work with Fragment 9 on Alt-J. So, let's talk about what people think of as video. This image is a bit of a provocation, really, because, you know, a lot of people come to me and they go, "Oh, you're a video designer, so do you do like tellies?" Yeah, and or do you record the shows? I get that a lot. No, I don't. I'm not even really qualified to do that. And actually, just this weekend, one of my Google alerts, I have Google alerts on my shows for some reason, came up with a review for the Phantom of the Opera US tour, which I was involved with, from the Boston Opera House. And as you can see, it says, "The vistas have been expanded by videos and projections by Nino Dunn and light/shadows by Paulie Constable." So the fact of the matter is that the vistas were printed cloths that were beautifully lit by Paulie Constable. And the light and shadows that they refer to were moments where Paulie drew back her lights and allowed video shadow play to take over, including gobos and also narrative. So I go from the point of view of confronting these sort of misconceptions a lot. For me, video is light. Well, of course it is. Can't really work without light, can it? I'm going to talk a little bit about comparative technology, something that you guys are all familiar with being at PLASA show. Light, basically, if you're using video outputs, you might be using LED panels or screens. These all involve light. And something that I use more than the LED end of the scale, DLP, LED and laser projectors. Basically that diagram there, it's got a lot of multicolored gubbins in the middle, but it's basically a light. It's a moving light, it's a light with animated gobo, but it's still a light. I've got a little note there to mention moving head projectors. This is an area of technology which I feel came to market at the wrong time in lots of ways, and has been used more in the corporate sphere really than in theatre and show technology. Unfortunately, they're quite hard to get hold of these days, and I'm really quite keen to use them. But there are... yeah, bring on the moving head projectors is what I'm saying. So I think it's quite important to talk about why they've disappeared, and whether they'll come back as well. But we'll talk about that perhaps a little bit later. And one final bit of comparative technology, something that people have been developing fairly recently, is the pixel mapping of other lighting fixtures. This is potentially really exciting for lighting designers. Obviously, I come to lighting from a video background, and lighting designers are also having to encompass video technology within their workflow. And I think it gets very exciting when your LED screen is a bank of 300 moving lights. So I'm just going to play a little game of spot the video within each scene. I'll just play that with myself for now because I quite a lot of you. So in all of these images I'm about to show you, I put the images up because they use video to support or replace light. The first large image, all of the light that you see on stage there, except for the actual fixtures, is video light. The image at the top, you've got a character and set made out of light. You've got gobos and a screen. There's a lot of video there. In fact, there's very, very little light in that picture at all. Light, traditional light. In the bottom image, the spotlight has been replaced by a video shape, which goes with the style of the show. In this image, the building on the top left is completely lit with video, including edge lighting, uplighting, that sort of thing. Bottom left, the content or the light that is appearing on the LED battens, that is video, supplied by video, and that workflow. The stained glass window is a video. We have images here that also show video in the subtlest form. In the main image, you might just be able to perceive an image of a woman within that white sphere. The rain light effect is supplied by video in the top. It's your right, isn't it? Top right image. The shadow at the bottom there is a classic moment where all the other light's gone and video is taken over. Again, all of these are video-based lighting. There's actually no traditional lighting in this first image with the green here that you can see. It's all done with projectors. There's lighting separation at the top there, where the downstage figure is lit with traditional fixtures and the upstage is lit with a moving texture. And yet more examples of the same. So there are very few tellies there though, aren't there? There are not really many screens involved with that. So video's light. So to support that, I think it's probably time to talk through a few case studies in a bit more detail. The first case study I'd like to present is Golem by 1927 Productions. Fantastic production that I'm sure many of you might have seen or heard of. Paul Barrett designed this one, and he was responsible for the set, the LX, and also some narrative and character elements. The entire show was lit with just projection, and in fact it was lit with one single 12K high definition projector from the front of house position. Now, this all sounds very clever and efficient, and for this show it worked extremely well. You can see how the character necessarily blends with the background. This is an animated show where characters take on a format where they are much, much less real, very non-three-dimensional. And that is also a quality of projected light that's been used to great effect in this particular show. It can also have its issues. Let's have a look. This one we're going to come back to a little bit more in a little bit more detail later. That Sarah's going to talk to us about. This is a show where the light was a character and a dynamic dancer within the space. But we'll talk about that in a minute with Sarah. And this is one of Josh's designs. Do you want to say a bit about
Yeah, sure. Hello. This is a show called The Shape of Pain that I made for Edinburgh Fringe this August, and it's solely lit with 3 projectors. Something that was a really interesting challenge about it is that the main objective of the show was for it to be fully captioned. So to do that we needed to use projection, and so we took that as our base palette for light, and then generated a lighting and textural palette that was using solely projectors to produce it. So it's a mixture of graphics and textures and text, and we use those 3 qualities to light the single performer. Something that I'm really interested in is using projectors and video as 3D, so using it as side light, using it as a quality that isn't just a flat surface. This show was a curved back screen, so we were creating a kind of surface behind the performer, but also using the light from the projectors to cross-light her as well. So, what images up there? So you can see on the top left there is an example of using texture from projectors as crosslight to sculpt her from the screen. And then on the right, using text and also blocks of light from the projector. So all 3 images are solely using projectors as light sources.
Thanks. Taking that another step further, as I mentioned, Josh is very deft at working on fringe level productions to great effect. And a recent production, another production on a different scale completely, was The Tempest by the RSC. Finn Ross worked with Imaginarium to create this show, and they had 27, isn't that right, Sarah? Is that 27 projectors? Yeah, something like that. Their rig diagram was insane. And they used a variety of servers to combine to the final effect. Most of the gobos were supplied by video, and as you can see, you can get quite sculptural with gobos on this particular show. There was also a backdrop that had more sort of traditional projection treatment on it, and then of course there was the character as well that was created live on stage through motion capture and gaming technology. Unfortunately, Finn couldn't join us today. He's just opened Frozen in Denver. Over to Pablo for this one.
Yeah, so this one for Alt J, what we wanted to do was envelop the band in a 3D space of light, both using video services, in this case Sketrons, and traditional lighting. So what we had is 3 sort of sections between each band member made out of Sketrons. Behind them there was a wall of, well, I say a wall, but separate panels of Vanish, which is another LED product. It's a low-res LED product like the Sketron. And then what we did was we developed, during rehearsals, we developed content in a way that would leverage the way the LED interacted with the environment, so the smoke, the other things on stage, the lighting, and we'd tweak and change the content in order to get, so I mean you can see it in some of these where you're getting a bloom around the pixels on the LED, so we're kind of doing stuff like that where we're controlling the intensity of the pixel to get more or less bloom in the smoke. And in this, very much the same way as you get that with a traditional light. If you're looking down the end of it, you get a lot of wash off from the light, and we're trying to recreate that in the video. So the 2 elements were seamless, so you weren't really seeing video, you weren't really seeing light, you were just seeing a canvas enveloping the band and creating these areas of light and dark.
Thank you. So this brings us to tools of the trade, really. Skills, collaborative workflows and content. Josh was saying to me earlier how he'd never come across the word workflow per se before he got involved in video, because perhaps the lighting designer's tool set has been an alternative to that process. At the moment, it feels like we need to be thinking more about show design rather than about separate disciplines. But in order to facilitate that, we need to be a lot more collaborative. We need to join up our tools and understand each other's tools even more. There's there's a necessity in every single show for designers to be talking and working off the same page, but now it comes right down to all the networks and systems and media servers that are involved. And also, there's a new question for lighting designers. I mean, obviously I come from a content maker's background into the lighting world, but lighting designers are now needing to embrace the need for actual content to make their own gobos, as it were. So sometimes, and even more so these days, that means that you might need to team up, and that's really what your role was within that lighting design. So more on the workflows, I think I'm going to hand over to Sarah. Just give me a nod when you need the next one.
Okay, I can't even remember what I put in it, so it's going to be...
Would you want to come over?
No, it's fine. I can see it from here. Yeah, so I'm from D3, and actually that word workflow is paramount to D3. When we actually sort of developed the company, the tool D3 comes out of pure necessity for workflow. It comes from United Visual Artists, who are a content and a creation house in their own right. And the problems they had, D3 became their in-house toolkit solution. And workflow is everything from pitching and presenting, so from that design stage where you're trying to test things, and at that stage, is it a light, is it a projector, is it an LED screen? These are not conversations at that part in their workflow. They're more concerned with, how does it look? Does it work from this angle? Does resolution play a key part? And then the industry technology that's required to deliver the artist's vision is then so far down the line in the journey of D3. It's sort of almost towards the end of D3's workflow journey. So if the whole world is a stage and everything we see is content, that's the idea, right? From whether it's a lighting lumiere to a pixel on an LED, we might as well look at everything as content, and it's that creative overall visual narrative that we're actually kind of purposefully dealing with. So pixel mapping for video content created for light. This is, in a technology sense, I would say probably the thing people do the most. Taking content, pixel mapping it to said technology fixtures, and this is not a new concept. It's been around for quite some time. However, what maybe is a workflow worth looking at is we have here a lighting company whose workflow of pixel mapping is by using video content. So they make a content template that they can use in After Effects, Photoshop, or any of those third-party softwares. They actually make a content template here with the way that the pixels need to be treated in the lighting rig. And by there, they're making a video file. That video file is composed to music. They're using beats and bars, and if you know anything about the journey of D3, we actually are a beats and bars system that more recently has adopted a hours, minutes, seconds, and frame workflow to combine both user cases. So you can see the content map that's made, then the content file that's rendered out, and then it goes into D3 and it's paired up with the virtual environment, so you can actually see what that looks like if we press play, or is that still? Do I do a still? Maybe the video finished, I wasn't looking. So we'll move on, So we've got the virtual world and the real world combined to interoperate. Let's have a look at that. So what do we mean by that? Well, we've used the pixel mapping workflow, but what if we can recreate the technical requirements, the technical products around you in a virtual space? So we have here on the back, you can see this entire scene, except for the light beams that you visibly see, the white bits. Everything else is created in a 3D world, in a virtual environment, using a third-party tool called Notch. And what the artist does is he brings the 3D environment into D3. He pairs up, every element in this 3D scene is controllable via his console, and he, as the composer of this 3D environment, has a real-time workflow. He can move screens in the virtual world, and you see what that movement looks like in the stage design. So I can actually tell you that entire back, the entire stage design there is just a big video wall. But everything you're seeing from truss to the lighting lumières is all being done virtually, but it's being controlled and programmed using our tool set, which is a console, lighting console workflow. So this is quite an interesting new thing that we're seeing as technology is driven forward with GPU power, giving people the ability to actually use these tools of virtual lighting. Thank you. So now we've got a concept of virtual lighting. There we had virtual lights. So if we develop that concept a step further into virtual lighting, we end up with the clear, loud, bright, forward concept from Matt Clark, one of the directors of United Visual Artists. Now this is actually, this was an installation at the Barbican called Pendulum. It's definitely worth having a look at. And there's lots of these all over the place, loads and loads of pendulums, and the light was conducted with these pendulums. And then it was developed and put into this, to the Paris Opera. And Matt talks about it, we're not going to listen to that. But what Matt's actually doing is taking the pendulums as the performers, as the actors, the choreographers. And with technology, the entire cube is just projection mapped. It's all rear projection around the entire 3D cube. And there's no lighting used except for projection, but the virtual lights from the pendulums exist inside D3. We'll probably get to it in a minute. It's a shame when we have one really static slide in the second. Sorry, I'll move on in a second.
Just while we're waiting for it to move on, it's kind of interesting because about 10 years ago, well, more than 10 years ago, we were talking about media servers that were able to be controlled by lighting desks, and that was a big thing back then, wasn't it? Yeah. Talk to us a little bit about how that's sort of changing.
I think in terms of lighting desks, I think there's a few different combinations of workflow that we see where lighting consoles can very much control the virtual lighting, and that's the development that's what we're likely to see. So here we go. Here's Notch, which is the third-party content tool. The virtual lights exist inside the scene, and you can see there's a whole bunch of nodes here that actually shape the light. So the light isn't defined by a lumiere that you pick. It's defined by this 3D content tool that makes that light. And you can expose all the parameters of the light, like a moving light. You can export the colour information, the gobo, the size of the beam, the velocity. All of this stuff can be exported. It gets moved into the media server, and then inside the media server we access those parameters, if you like, the characteristics of that light. We access those in real time as if it was a piece of video. So from that we can keyframe, we can control any of those elements in real time using a lighting desk. So we can use the more relevant today tools and programming techniques, but to access this virtual lighting idea. And of course in a virtual lighting scenario, so this is the lovely content map to make sure everything appears as it should in 3D space. I've got one in there. So from the virtual lighting perspective, virtual lights can behave in any way that we want them to. They're not defined by where they physically are. So if there is not a position to place a light, then this workflow does not replace lighting, but it is an additional tool set, it's an additional toolkit. So when you can't place a light in the bottom corner, you can turn to your virtual world, and now you can grab that light and place it anywhere you like in that 3D scene. But you can still expose the properties of the light to a lighting programmer who can have the same workflow that they've always had, but now they have this virtual light that they've got control of. So,
no, that's okay. Okay.
I was going to say, so that is, technology allows us actually to re-evolve the workflows as more and more technology is expanded and as more of these tool sets come into the hands of lighting programmers, video programmers. We're actually able to re-evaluate what that word workflow is and who else now comes into that and has access to those tools and technology.
Thank you very much. That's really exciting. I'd like to open the floor. I've opened it up to the floor and the panel at the moment at this stage because I want to give enough time for this subject. I know lots of people will have questions as well. So Sarah, you say, just to pick up from where you left off, you were saying it's a collaborative thing. Do you think there's a world in which video could replace lighting?
Ouch. Start with the easy one. I think this question has to be definitely handled with care. I think that there is a world where the technology is changing, workflows are adapting and moving, and other skill sets are coming into our industry that understand these workflows, particularly game engine designers, those technologists, engineers, these people really do understand these workflows, and if we embrace them and bring them in, what we have is an opportunity to expand our toolkits accessible to us, to bring shows alive, I think. But I don't believe in the sense of replacement. I believe in the sense of combining and collaboration.
I think that's really interesting. But I think one of the things that comes to mind when you're talking is that a lot of people, a lot of technology, surely that's all very, very expensive. I'm going to put this question to Josh, the same question actually, in your experience and how you use video as a tool.
Yeah, as somebody who is kind of working at like fringe level to mid-scale theatre, and a lot of the technology isn't that available to me, really. A lot of the shows that I use video on, they're kind of like desktop projectors, they're kind of like 600, 700 quid units, I really can't even go near the expensive stuff. But there's a quality in video design and using video design as a light source that I think opens up a whole range of aesthetic opportunities, and there's a huge amount that you can do with it that you can't do with traditional or even automated light sources. And I think there's a real crossover between the kind of textures and digital textures that we can make that we could never achieve with lights. And I think there's a kind of quality that I've really enjoyed embracing. But equally, I think there's also a kind of beauty in traditional lighting and the fixtures that we have for those, particularly in the kind of like warm end of the spectrum, and a colour rendering index that will currently we're nowhere near with projectors. That I think we need to find the balance and the crossover of that, as well as workflow. So I think there's two discussions really. There's the physical rig that we use and the different qualities that those bring to the table, and whether they will ever fully replace each other. And there's also the like video aesthetic design workflow that, for me, I'm finding it a really exciting way of designing lighting, because it's changing my lighting design process as well as my video design process.
And Rick, has it changed your process to have to collaborate with so many videos?
Well, it's some of my first very early collaborations with projected light and projected content were pretty painful, to be honest. Because we're dealing in the same tool, we both have light, and one light can cancel out the other very happily. And we spent a lot of time trying to do that or trying not to do that. I was also very frustrated because their light never went out. Because as we all know, video black is really just video, not black. But that's gotten better as the tools have gotten better. And also as the controls got better, because one of the things that really frustrated me too was that I would be carefully thinking about the timing of how my light moved in and out, and that seemed to be something that the content video designer or programmer type person didn't seem to really think about too much at all. And so again, what's happened is the merging, and I take on board that what we want are more tools that we can then choose what's the right type of light to use at any one time. We don't want less, so it's not a question about replacing. There may be projects like some of the ones it sounds like Josh is doing, where that's just what you're using because it's right for that project. But it's that combination. I think there are qualities of the more traditional light, or even some of the more less traditional ways of producing light, maybe they LED or whatever that we're now surrounded with, that still have a quality of warmth, color rendering that other basically flat projected light never will have. So it's really about working together. But also, I have to embrace as a lighting designer that occasionally there's a big light source placed there that I should be able to use as well. And so in a little show that's on at Wilton's, the light source that happened to be out front from the projector could throw a tiny little spot on a face that I didn't have a position to do, or the right narrow instrument, because of course you could just pixel map the and move it to wherever that face happened to be, and as we toured the show. So again, it was a good learning curve for me to say, I can ask the projected video content to help me out with what my problems are. So
That's a
good.
wonderful open door in lots of ways, and I think on the sort of low end of the budget scale, I've done 3 R&Ds this year, one with the Unicorn, one with the RSC and one with the National, and all of those have almost necessarily just been lit with video, because that's the thing we're testing, but equally to walk into the room you might just imagine that we had a huge rig of lights, really, because we were able to be so accurate with it. Pre-visualization is another tool that is, of course, evolving and helping the discussion. Do you use a lot of pre-vis at Backstage Academy?
Well, I would say my entire workflow is around previs. I also do a lot of professional work as well, and essentially I make video games for a living, but those video games are millimeter accurate simulations of shows. Everything from automation to lighting, video, everything is part of that virtual world. And I think it's critical to use the time that you can when it's not expensive, when it's not on site, and you're trying to figure out how that's all going to come together to make workflow better. And that collaboration process is getting much closer as the tools merge. I can remember almost 15 years ago I went to a conference that High End Systems was doing here in London. They called it the Digital Lighting University. And it was all lighting people talking about how they were going to control these media servers and projectors using lighting consoles. It was all about lighting controlling video. And a few years later, it was actually video talking about controlling lighting. And there's always swings and roundabouts, and particularly on the control side, we see a lot of that as well, where am I the one that's going to project that, or somebody else? And really, for me, I see everything as just surfaces and outputs. A light is a pixel, or a light is a source, and video is a source, whether it's an LED screen or a projector. And being able to understand how we're going to work with those surfaces and sources is key. And I tell my students that basically there are 2 things that are the rules: physics and budget. And you can usually overcome some physics problems if you have enough budget, but you can't do the other. You can't solve budget problems with physics. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually what you talk about in terms of it all being one workflow, it feels like Concert and Live has embraced that workflow a lot sooner, and a lot more lighting designers would consider themselves video designers without even questioning it within the concert world. Would you say that's true, Pablo?
Yeah, absolutely. I think from certainly the sort of stuff I'm involved in, probably 67% of what we do is all previs. You know, you spend the time. Like you say, you spend the time when you have the least expensive time working out what you want to do. Then when you get into rehearsals, you can really start tweaking stuff and really seeing how things interact. And because you've got everything planned, you can kind of go in there with a really good idea of what you want to achieve.
I mean, I think this is an area that larger theatres are also very capable of dealing with. But I remember 10 years ago when I did my first opera, the director was astonished and also delighted to see a storyboard. He'd never had an experience where a video designer had showed him ahead of time what was going to happen on stage. And so there was a lot of fear around video at that time, and how it could mess up a lighting design, and how it could go, because when video goes wrong, it really goes wrong. It's really awful. Any horror stories from anyone here?
Oh, yes. I just want to comment that often, at the moment, most of the shows I'm involved in are projection shows, and so it tends to be I'm mapping a building or something, and actually lighting becomes kind of an enhancement of those types of things. But there are other times where you have to come back to the story, especially in theater. We're telling stories, and so unless it's a good reason to use a projected image, don't do it. Sometimes the most simple scene can tell the story better than anything else, and so I think choosing the times of how you're going to use content, whether that's lighting or video, is still critical. We're really about telling experiences.
Yeah. My content still is provided by actors. They're the content, and I light them, as opposed to having to light content. And that's still what I'm doing. And so it's getting it to work together when it can enhance or give it texture or something like that. I think what I'm happy to see in my long career is the using of video projected content to provide background and location. And that's sort of very simplistic. Oh, we don't have to have scenery anymore. We can just project a backcloth. that's going the way of the dodo, because we all know how uninteresting that is and how really not very successful, and particularly not theatrical that is. So I think it's incumbent on this next generation to be providing interesting new experiences that are still deeply theatrical. And that's not just projecting a sunset or a street scene.
And it feels like that, I mean, quite often people sort of say, so what have you done on this show? Can't really see any video. And normally what I say is that if there's something that you can't quite work out how it's done, you probably drill down to find a video workflow somewhere there. You know, the Harry Potter back in time effect is video, and various other effects that people, don't necessarily imagine to be video. So, I wonder if, questions, yeah. Anyone got any questions? Can we have a bit more auditorium light? Or is that, oh no, it's quite bright, isn't it?
It's kind of bright.
Be brave.
Can we just poll the audience? Are there video people or lighting people here? Who's a video person? Okay. And who's a lighting person? And why do you consider yourself one or the other? Can somebody answer that? Anyone? No one's brave. Yes?
Well, I've done both. Nick Moran, I've done both. Lighting on a much larger scale than I've ever done video. My video practice is much more like Josh's than it is like Nina's. It is really interesting to start using video on a small scale as a lighting tool. But the problems that I've come across on a small scale are that you can see the pixels. And because the audience is quite close to the performers on a small scale as well. Josh, have you got any experience of that? How you use it, how you get away with it, or?
Yeah, it's a common problem. Something that I try and push towards using HD projectors, even if I'm just using it for simplistic light shapes and textures, just to try and pull back on the size of the pixels. I lit a show called Bunny Doors last year that was, we could only afford low resolution projectors, but they were high brightness. And luckily the audience were far enough away that you couldn't see the pixels, but all the photographs of the show, you could see all the pixels. So that was a really good learning curve. But importantly, by eye, you couldn't see the pixels. I guess something that is, you also have to consider the content and whether the content reveals, if it's just a kind of quite simplistic high contrast, then I think it works. But if you're trying to do kind of subtler work, then it becomes an issue. But hopefully 4K projectors will be really cheap soon, and then it'll be fine.
A couple of years.
One of the people who put up their hands for lighting, why do you have an interest in listening to what we have to say here? Why do you want to learn about this?
So I'm still very much a student of lighting at the moment, but the few shows I have worked on, video is coming into it more and more, bigger and bigger, to the point where one of the first shows I've ever actually designed had a video element which I had to head up and teach myself how to do and fail. I ended up getting someone else to do it for me and just use the projector. But it's becoming such a big thing. I think it's almost necessary for this new generation of designers to understand both, because I think you'll see a lot more now just people being video and lighting, and I think I'm in a position now where if I learn it now, the sooner I can learn it, the more independent of it, and then I won't have to worry so much about sort of getting into a production meeting when someone says, "Can you do this?" and I can go, "No, not really." So I think the sooner you learn it, and this is the reason I'm here, the sooner you learn it, the sooner you can just advertise yourself as being able to do both, and suddenly you're a lot more employable.
I had a thought to that. Something that I've experienced as somebody who is growing as a lighting and video designer is that you do have to also think about the amount of time that you spend doing either or. And you definitely have to approach something, well, in my experience I've had to approach it very much from a lighting head and really approach it dramaturgically and aesthetically from that end. And then also think about what the kind of aesthetic visually is and the kind of whole range of palette that opens up. But it can mean that you actually end up splitting your head in a really quite severe way. And actually I think embracing teams and then teams being acknowledged as lighting and video as a whole, which in concert is a much more common thing, but in theatre it doesn't seem to be very common. And I'd be interested for that to become more of a thing. But it's great to understand both, but I also think don't spread yourself too thinly, or like know how that impacts upon your timeline and your pay as well.
I think I was just going to add something to that, just saying that, and I think some of the larger receiving and producing houses still put their video departments with their sound teams. And this is strange, no? Anybody want to comment on that from this side?
I work at a receiving house, and we're seeing more and more shows come in at mid-scale with video in them. So my Lampy is here trying to learn a bit more about that, instead of my Soundy coming to do it. So I think it's starting to change, but we had burning doors, we had the machine stops, we had another one that I can't remember that had a giant ramp that the projectors were aimed at, which was just amazing, and the name is, I'm at a loss for it at the moment, but it was just an amazing use of video. And again, with burning doors, you're right, you couldn't see the pixels by eye, but you could in the photos. And it's, like you say, the day will come when 4K projectors are a lot more affordable, and then people will stop nitpicking about the photos being not as good as what it was in real life. But that's what you were saying about lumping AV in the sound and video. It's starting to change. The attitudes are starting to change. And it'll be interesting to see what the next kind of 5 years brings.
Absolutely, and I think also, I mean, Josh is talking about workflow. I'm always talking to the academies that I work with and my students about how video is a team thing in itself, especially with the two-sided brain that you need for the technical and the content side of things. And then encompassing the lighting I think is a great thing, because then people really will see it as a team. I mean, to a certain extent, devil's advocate, you might have a rig of, you know, a couple of hundred lights to deal with, but also on the video side, you're dealing with many fewer fixtures on lots of occasions, so providing the resolution is good enough. I feel as a video designer I can save the lighting designer a special or two, because I can, you know, put my light there and I just need to make a new
I still think it's one of the things I've noticed is that I'm not expected to know how to really rig or maintain or fix my lights. I think video designers are still expected to understand the whole. I think that you're employed often as a video designer as a one-person band, whereas you employ a lighting designer, you'll get a production electrician, you'll get a programmer. And a lot of, still, on most medium-scale to small-scale productions, unfortunately, you're coming in, you're having to do the technical specification, the technical delivering, and the content before you even think about the bit that I'm interested in, which is the dramaturgy, about how we're merging it all together. So I think we're still at a very early stages, and I think it's incumbent on the projection world to start to support themselves the way that lighting has become supported, and the way that sound is. You know, look how big the sound team is, for God's sake. And if you want to really look at a big team, look at the fundraising team. But that's another story.
Or merchandise.
Yeah. Or somewhere in the personnel management side. But I think it's important. I think our expectations, or the management's expectations, oh, we'll get in a Nina, we'll get in a Josh, and you'll take care of everything from soup to nuts in terms of projection. And when it doesn't work quickly and efficiently, they're surprised. Whereas if they expect me to rig the lights, they'll be very surprised.
They get a real surprise when I try and rig lights, I tell you that. Actually, weirdly enough, that's one of the occasions where being a girl really helps, because that works to my advantage. They just don't expect me to be the person in the steelies up the ladder, which is quite good. I was just at a very interesting, the previous discussion within this space was about female collaborators backstage. And I guess that's one of the ways that it works to my advantage. But not that I want to pull that card.
I was going to say, I think we've also seen over in the US, I think there's definite movement in the video sense of team building actually teams, and adding new roles to that production environment. So Laura Frank, for example, is now a screens producer. And this is not something that we can embrace here yet because of budgets. We always laugh in Europe when you see the production schedule of how many people are involved in sending a broadcast signal out from a broadcast show. Then it comes here and there's, a quarter of the personnel allocated to do those roles. So I think it is about us helping to carve that and define that by saying, well, there does need to be a buffer and there needs to be somebody in front that takes that creative and then feeds it into the teams who are specialised to knock content out and then do real-time changes. And I think probably Pablo's got a better idea of that than me, about working in real time with a director next to you.
Yeah, so earlier this year we did the launch of the Samsung new Edge phone with Raw Blood, which is a 360-degree shot and broadcast on YouTube show with Raw Blood in a circular environment with projection all the way around. And the video team on that was, unlike what you were just saying, was actually quite large, because people are starting, it had the budget and people realise now that you need all those different disciplines in order to make this stuff work. You can't just rely on one or two people doing multiple jobs, because, as you said, it just doesn't work. When you run into a problem, you just don't have the people power to make those problems go away or become resolved. So yeah, definitely it's one of those things you can do on a shoestring budget if that's what you need to do. But as the complexity of the integration and the technology gets increased, you start needing more and more specialist people involved to make that show work. And I think, as you were saying, having a broad understanding of how it all works is really important. Whether you're a specialist or not, you need to know how all of your tools kind of work, even if you don't know exactly. You're not sort of assigning specific. You're not changing macros in it or rewriting code or something like that. But you're just a broad understanding of what needs to happen is absolutely essential, I think. So.
What I've seen happen as well actually is that it sometimes splits. It really, really informs the design. I mean, I'm by training a very content-based designer, and it's been a sort of revelation for me to use much more basic content. I spent 6 years in broadcast and film before I even walked into a theatre as a professional, and that was a big learning curve for me as well. And so sometimes, you need to team up with people and introduce them into theatre, which is, a very different space to work on content in, where you go into a space and you know that every single piece of content will be changed during the course of a technical rehearsal. And to understand that from a film background is very hard, so sometimes finding your team who can get that and start working with that is really useful. It will also inform, Josh's designs, your designs are very light touch in terms of the content treatment, but very sort of dynamic. So an aesthetic will evolve potentially out of necessity and out of constraint.
For a show that I was nominated for a Night of Illumination called Removal Men, I used 4 projectors and lit it pretty much like 80% was projection. But content-wise, we started tech with 6 bits of content, most of which were blocks and some kind of like textural stripes. And then we used Catalyst to transform all that content into 3D space and respond to the performers in the space and respond to the tech as I would a lighting designer, really. But there was so much in the qualities that I could find in the projectors that it evolved through the tech and through previews into something that was, I think I had like 6 times the amount of content by the time I finished the tech. But I just started with this really small palette, and then it evolved naturally through using the projectors.
Yeah, we often have a similar thing where you're creating content and you're obviously working predominantly with just a flat computer screen whilst you're producing that content, and often the temptation to make it more complex than it needs to be is quite is quite strong, especially when you show it to clients or other people involved just on that flat screen, because they kind of have that look on their face, like, is that it? I thought it could be a lot more interesting than that. But then when you kind of bring that into a previs environment, or if you're lucky enough to have a long rehearsal time and you can start putting those things into the real space or into previs, then you can really see how those elements are going to interact. And often I find I will be paring stuff back, I'll be taking stuff out, I'll be taking layers out, making it more simple, just because we're trying to get, often what we're trying to do is not make the video look like video, as you were saying, we're trying to make it look as a part of the whole lighting canvas. We want it to be indistinguishable between the two areas, and so it's an iterative process basically. It's really
it's probably way beyond the time where we should have been mentioning generative content, really, because that's something that's going to rob us all of a job, I think, really.
I'd like to disagree with that, actually. I think there's great opportunity. We are at a critical point in video design with technology. This year, the computing technology that we have right now is allowing us to open a door into not having to render anymore, and for video, suddenly this changes everything, because a lot of the time we've been spending trying to make content. I mean, I have a show in the last year that was 4 4K projectors, and it's 16,000 pixels wide of content, and it's not 4K a movie or an HD movie that I'm having to render. But everything I did for that show was live. I made the content for that show in less than 2 weeks out of images that were rendering in real time, because I had the tools and because I had the technology, but more importantly because it saved me time, and I could actually make choices late in the process. And that's a critical thing, is especially in live shows or theater, you need to be able to make those choices about the design changes of how the textures are going to work in rehearsal, and not be waiting for a render farm to spit out content. You have to be able to move to that, and there's actually opportunity for better collaboration. I want my scenic video that's driving the whole scenic scene to actually be controlled, the lighting in that scene to be controlled by the lighting desk. Let them control the lighting of what time of day it is, or the direction of where the sun is coming from in 3D space, so that rays of light and volumetric particles are casting shadows, and all of that should be happening live. All of that. So there's really good opportunity, and we're talking about the collaboration process and future jobs and things. For people to know that there's a job for a content wrangler, there's a job for a lighting person, there's a job for a computer programmer. Those are all collaborative things, and when I try to recruit people into my course, I look at somebody who's a fine art person, or a computer programmer, or a lighting designer, or an architect. Those are all really interesting collaborators to be working with, and they should learn about each other. They should learn about what each other needs to be able to make better content.
Yeah, just to say from that, and this is not a company branding pitch, but literally everything that drives D3 from day one to now to 10 years' time is one environment, one show environment. Where, like Rick was saying, where a change in lighting, you can see that knock-on effect to the video team. And overnight you can have people making changes, and as the next team comes in the next morning, they see those real-world knock-on effects. And I think that maybe it takes tools like that to start to bring people together in one shared environment, where you can at least start to see how those things affect each other and changes.
And people might have the impression also that live and generative content needs to be, by definition, sort of very particly or very one-dimensional. But if I could imagine doing No Man's Land again, which I did in the West End last year, we created a 3D scene of trees that were generated almost at random, and then arranged according to the designer's desires. And it's a show that happens over the course of 24 hours, so there was a lot of very realistic lighting that we were producing, and of course lighting that supports the narrative. It was actually the only thing that really told us what was going on during the day was on the video element, because the rest of the show happened within one room, whole thing. But if I could imagine a workflow whereby the lighting designer could input into that and help me light those trees and help me to generate those effects, and all the sort of atmospheric effects that we were collaborating on sort of after the fact, then that would be an extremely exciting thing.
I helped out on one of the stands here earlier this week, and we were pixel mapping. It's over on Chauvet's stand, and we were actually pixel mapping all the fixtures. And as quickly as possible in the creative process with the lighting designer, I aimed to give the lighting designer as much control over the entire show as possible. And so I basically set it up so that he had choice of what video he wanted to work with, and he had choice over when the timings of that were. And as quickly as possible, I was able to wash my hands and go to the pub. And it was great. And he was able to have full control of the whole palette of what it was, and technically it was all working and it was all great, and he stayed till 4 a.m. I was like, great, awesome, fantastic. Lighting is now helping me to do my work better. And it looks good, and he's really happy about it, and I'm really happy about it, and I got to leave early.
And it's normally the video guys who don't have any breaks at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Shows. We've got about 2 minutes left. I just want to say, are there any more questions? We've done a lot of talking here. In which case, I'll leave those. Oh, yeah, go for it.
Where to start?
Sorry?
Where to start?
Where to start? Very good question.
What design?
I would say, as quickly as possible, understand 3D space. As quickly as possible. Right now, if you do not understand 3D space in digital, it's time to learn, because everything we do now relates to how surfaces and the world and the virtual version of that works. And if you can learn Cinema 4D or Maya or any of those tools, you will be at an advantage right now. And actually, if you don't, you're going to find you're not collaborating with anybody, because everybody's going to be working in 3D space. So go learn 3D.
Same question for you, Pablo.
Yeah, I definitely reiterate what Rick was saying. Is particularly from the previous side with us, understanding how the workflow is, particularly get into previs, because you can really start playing around with concepts and seeing how they're going to turn out early on, before you even go and speak to your client or speak to your producers or whatever. You can really play around with stuff in that environment and kind of work out some directions to go.
Well, I think I'm the dinosaur. I started out playing with lights, and I would still encourage people to get their hands on whatever tools they want to work with, whether it's a projector, whether it's a parquet, whether it's an incandescent light bulb, if they still exist, or it's an LED, which probably does exist, or a fluorescent tube, and start playing with them and using them and learning how they work. From my point of view, that's still, I think, and working with other people to see what these things mean. And it's just understanding what your tools mean and what they convey, because they will convey different things at different times to different people, and that's what's exciting about everything that we do, bringing it together.
I would add to that and say a similar thing is get a projector in a room and find the beautiful qualities in it, or find what is beautiful in these new digital products, but find the beauty in it as opposed to what is necessarily kind of sophisticated and showy. I think actually there's a simplicity in this complex way of working that I think is really exciting.
And of course, I'm going to come at it from a completely technology-driven answer. Get D3? No, I'm joking. No, seriously, I actually think that augmented reality, virtual realities, these technologies are here, they are coming and they are growing. The difference between our world and their world is that we create shared experiences, and they create an isolating, singular experience. So if we actually look at the technologies that are coming in that world, that we are already embracing, I think that's a good place to start of how we can actually create these new worlds in our live shared experience.
Can I be even more of a dinosaur and just say start with a story and see what the story needs? Because sometimes it really doesn't need any of this stuff.
Good words,
Thank you very much.